Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Thanks, Elizabeth and Zaya, for Long Mangalji to be able to present to us today about immigration pathways and options for students to immigrate to Canada. This should be about an hour session where Elizabeth will walk you through the steps of everything. And then after the end of the session, she'll provide a link to the recording for persons who have to leave early, and also a copy of the slideshow if you have registered for this event via her email link. So if you have to step out early, don't worry, you won't miss anything. They'll make sure you get a copy of the information that was shared at this presentation. Thanks again for being here with us today, and hope you enjoy this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roxanne. It's a pleasure to be back with you guys again. We do this session every year, and every year there's always so many changes that happens, especially this year because of COVID. There's been a lot of things that's been happening. Today, what we're going to be talking about is we're going to be talking about different kinds of immigration solutions for students, workers, and entrepreneurs who are in Canada and in the Hamilton region, which is one of my favorite cities in Ontario. But before we actually get started about talking about permanent residence, I always start off with talking about some of the things that you guys need to know about temporary residence. Because in order to get to permanent residence, you have to make sure that you guys stay in status and you can continue to study and work in Canada. And a very, very important concept that you guys must know when you are a temporary resident, if you're a student, a worker, or a visitor, is that you must maintain your status. And it's this concept of implied status that is very important. So what this implied status means is, let's say I have a work permit and it expires on April 30th, okay? Now, if I go and submit an extension of my work permit before it expires, the website says 30 days, but that's just a recommendation. That's not the law. As long as I submit it before it expires. Let's say I submit the extension on April 29th, okay? I can continue to work based on implied status until a decision is made on the application. So let's say a decision is not made until June 30th. So I can continue to work until June 30th. Now, what if, when I applied for the work permit, I didn't actually qualify for a work permit? Let's say my work permit required me to have an LMIA and I didn't have an LMIA, okay? On June 30th, what happens is that, if I didn't qualify, the officer will reject the application. At that point, you don't have status in Canada, but you don't necessarily have to leave right away. You could file a restoration of status. And the restoration period is normally 90 days from the date that I lost my status. So if I filed my extension before April 30th and I had implied status until June 30th, then my restoration period starts when? It starts on June 30th when it was rejected. So I have 90 days from that date to file a restoration of status. And let's say I get my LMIA, I can file restoration and get my work permit back. I don't have to leave the country. There is a special policy right now during COVID times where the government has extended that restoration period for people who have lost their status after January 30th of last year. They have until August 31st of this year to file the restoration. Okay, so you either have 90 days or until August 31st of this year to file the restoration, whichever is longer for you. Okay, so the second concept I want to talk to you guys about is the high skilled versus the low skilled positions. Now, when we talk about permanent residence, you will see that for the most part, most high skilled positions will allow you to get permanent residence, whereas most low skilled positions won't. So what's high skilled and what's low skilled? I like to play a little game with people, and even though this is kind of like me being on TV and I can't really see you guys, you can see me. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna say some occupations, and let's see if you can guess whether or not it's high skilled or low skilled. Okay, let's take an office situation. If I am a receptionist, is that high skilled or low skilled? That's low skilled. A data entry clerk, that's low skilled. A secretary, that's high skilled. A bookkeeper, that's high skilled. An accounting clerk, that's low skilled. A medical assistant, that's high skilled. A dental assistant, that's low skilled. Okay, so as you can see, oftentimes it's not exactly clear what's high skilled, what's low skilled. The government has grouped all of the occupations into what they call a national occupation classification codes. And it's grouped into 5 categories. The O, A, and B are high skilled, or the C and D are low skilled. So what I always tell my clients is don't just assume what you do is high skilled. Make sure you check to make sure that what you do, it's not just what you're called, it's what you actually do is found to be high skilled or low skilled. I'm going to talk briefly about studying and working on a study permit. I know that sometimes we have some students in the audience, and so this is for you guys, okay? So first of all, very important is that you have to actively pursue your studies. If you don't, it doesn't matter when your study permit expires, you could lose your status. You would lose your status within 90 days of you stopping studying, okay? The only 2 exceptions to the rule is when you're on a scheduled break. So for example, you have a summer holidays when you're an undergrad, right? That's on the academic calendar, and that's a scheduled break. That's fine. Or if you have authorized leave. So this is pertaining to your special circumstances. Let's say you're sick with COVID, or you need to take care of a family member, and you must get permission from the school to take that time off. If you do, and it's within 150 days, okay, that time is considered authorized leave, and you won't lose your status, okay? During the authorized leave, you cannot work at all, okay? Because you can only work when you're a full-time student, okay? So if you are, unless it's in the last semester, you can take 1 or 2 courses and be part-time. You can actually work full-time if you're in the last semester and you're part-time. But other than that, you can only work while you are registered as a full-time student. And when you complete your studies, you're no longer on a break. When you complete your studies, you are no longer a full-time student. So you cannot work full-time, part-time, anytime at all, okay? The only time you can work is if you finished one program and you are going to start another program. You've already been accepted to the other program, and there's only 1 semester in between the programs, less than 150 days. So let's say I finished my program in April, and I'm going to start a new program in September. I've already been accepted to that new program, then I can study in between these 2 programs. Okay. If your classes are canceled because of COVID, I think this was only in the beginning. Now most classes are still online, okay? But if your classes are canceled because of COVID, you could work part-time if your classes are canceled, okay? Now, going to the post-grad work permit, there are a few things that you have to understand. The work permit length is very, very important because the post-grad work permit, you only get one post-grad work permit, so you cannot waste that work permit, okay? When you graduate, if you have a 1-year program, you get a 1-year post-grad work permit. If you have a 2-year program, you have 3-year work permit. If you have a 1-year and then you complete the second 1 year, within 2 years of graduation of the first program, you get a 3-year work permit. And oftentimes, especially now, when there is, it's difficult to find jobs because of COVID, you may not get enough work experience to qualify for permanent residence or have a good chance for permanent residence with only a 1-year work permit. You don't get another post-grad work permit. Okay, there's a caveat. The government is allowing people whose work permits are expiring now, until you can apply until July 27th within 4 months. So the deadline for your expiry of your work permit is November 27th to have a one-time deal to apply for extension for 18 months. But this is a very, very exceptional time. If your work permit expires, long after that, you cannot count on you being able to extend your work permit because traditionally you're not allowed to extend your work permit, okay? And so what that means is if your work permit is only for a short period of time, then, and you don't have enough time to get what you need, you may not be able to stay in Canada. You may not be able to extend your work permit. We're going to talk about other kinds of work permits, and you can see that it can be quite difficult to get another work permit, okay? So the other thing about post-grad work permits that we're finding as well is a lot of times people, you may not have realized how strict the government is being as to only issuing post-grad work permits to students who have studied full-time the entire length of your study period. Right now, they are asking to see your transcripts to make sure that all your course load meets the full-time. And if your course load doesn't reflect that, they could very well reject it unless you have a very, very convincing reason as to why you should be allowed to have that. So if your transcripts don't show that you have been a full-time student throughout the entire length of your program, then you may want to hire a lawyer to help you convince them that you should be able to get the post-grad work permit, okay? If it's canceled because of COVID, they are saying that's a reason, but you have to record that reason. You have to have evidence to show that that was the reason why. As to the time, when should you apply for your post-grad work permit? The website says 180 days, but I tell people you should apply within 90 days of the completion of your program, or if your study permit expires earlier than that date, okay? The reason why is because you lose your status within 90 days of your completion of your program, okay? And so if you needed to, if you wanted to get a work permit you file after the 90 days, then you would have to file restoration of status, and you won't have status until you get your new work permit. Whereas if you apply within 90 days, you will always maintain your status, and also you can, as long as your study permit is still valid, you apply within 90 days, you can start working while waiting for your work permit. If you don't file within 90 days and when your study permit is still valid, you cannot work while waiting for your work permit. Right now, you're not allowed to go to the border to apply for your work permit. You have to apply online, and sometimes it could take a few months for a decision to be made. And you want to make sure that you can start working right away. So keep that rule in mind. Apply for your post-grad work permit the earlier of when your study permit expires before that date or 90 days, whichever comes earlier. All right, let's talk about some other kinds of work permits that you guys may have. The LMIA, the traditional one, is something where an employer has to recruit Canadians for the position and has to convince an officer that it's not possible or likely for them to find a Canadian who's able to do the job. This is not an easy endeavor to do, and oftentimes, unless the job is very, very crucial, the employer may not be willing to do a traditional LMIA. There is a stream called the Global Talent Stream that targets mainly people in the tech industry. And, you know, this allows the employer to bypass the recruitment efforts, but it does require them to show that they have a labor market benefit, that they will have 3 labor market benefits, such as hiring other Canadians, training other Canadians, and other things that they will do in order to be able to hire a foreign worker. This is something that we often use for highly specialized workers that the employer might really need. But because there are obligations on the employers, it's not necessarily something that the employers will do lightly. Okay, it's mostly for tech workers, but there's also another stream for highly innovative companies where they are going to hire very, very specialized people that are paid at a higher salary as well. Okay, and you have to go through a referral partner. And so the city of Hamilton is actually a referral partner. So if your employer is in Hamilton, you can actually contact Tammy and others at the city of Hamilton to see if your employer might be referred for the Global Talent Stream. The other one that we often use is the intra-company transferee category. This is a work permit for people who are transferred from an outside company outside of Canada to a company inside Canada. And we often see many specialized workers who are transferred from overseas to Canada. You may be on one of these work permits. Also, we have a lot of entrepreneurs who have their own businesses outside of Canada and want to start a subsidiary in Canada, and they might transfer themselves over here as well. So a lot of specialized workers, senior managers, and executive managers through this category. Free trade agreements. These are really good work permits that we can get if you're professional from one of the free trade countries, such as US, Mexico, Colombia, Chile, Peru, EU countries, Panama, Korea. So, if you're a professional from one of these countries and you have a job offer here on one of the occupations, every agreement is different. It depends on the profession as well, depends on your circumstances, but these are work permits that can be obtained that bypasses the LMIA. The employer does not have to do an LMIA for this. Bridging work permits are open work permits that allow someone who has gone through a certain length of the permanent residence to allow them to continue to work in Canada until a decision is made. So let's say you apply under the express entry category and you have received an ITA and you've submitted your application and you still have your work permit, but it's going to expire within 4 months. You can apply for a bridging work permit, which is the open work permit, to allow you to continue to work in Canada until a decision is made. Similarly, you can do that with provincial nominee programs. If you have a nomination There's other ones like caregiver programs, some of the agriculture pilot programs, you can do that as well. Spousal work permits. If you are married or you're common law, the definition of common law in Canada for immigration purposes is someone you have lived together in a conjugal relationship for at least 1 year. So if you have done that, you have to declare that person as your family member, as your common law partner, irrespective of whether or not they're accompanying you or not. Okay, so make sure that if you have a work permit, your spouse, and you work in a high-skilled position, your spouse gets an open work permit. If you have a study permit, your spouse gets an open work permit. So these are good because your spouse may be in a better position to be able to apply for permanent residence afterwards as well. And you can apply together as a group. But just keep in mind that whether or not you want them to be accompanying you or not, or whether or not you feel like your relationship is strong enough or whatnot, it doesn't matter. If you guys have been living together for at least a year in a conjugal relationship, they are your spouse and you have to declare them. If you don't declare them, then afterwards you cannot sponsor them anymore. Okay. Francophone work permits are great if you are fluent in French and you have a high-skilled job anywhere outside of Quebec. You can get a work permit where the employer does not have to go through LMIA. International experience class. Now, during COVID, this class has experienced some closures. They are opening them up, but right now you do have to have a job offer for this. The IEC is for young people, usually under the age of 30. Some of the categories are under the age of 35. Of certain countries can apply, and there's quotas for every country where you can get a working holiday work permit, or if you have a job offer that's high skilled in Canada, you can apply for the young professionals. But right now, because of COVID, even the working holiday work permit, you can only come to Canada if you have a job offer. Provincial nominee programs. Basically, if you have a nomination, you can get a work permit based on that. There are two kinds. One is a bridging work permit, it's an open work permit. But if you have an employer-specific nomination, then you have to get an employer-specific work permit. We're going to talk a little bit about this for the Ontario provincial nominee programs in just a bit. Charitable work permits. So if you're working for a charity in a position that normally you're not competing with the labor market, people don't normally, get paid for this kind of work. You can be paid a stipend, you can get a work permit. Or if you are a clergy, you can also get a work permit, and you can also work even without a work permit as well. Okay, so talked a lot about temporary residence. Let's move on to permanent residence. The first category I wanted to talk with you guys about is express entry. Express entry is probably the most well-known category for permanent resident, and it works like this. First, you create an online profile, and you can create an online profile only if you qualify under one of three categories: Federal Skilled Worker class, Canadian Experience class, or Federal Skilled Trades class. When you create a profile, you'll be entered into the pool. And every couple of weeks or so, the government announces a draw where they announce a number, and now they are announcing the category as well. Okay, so when you get into the pool, you'll get your points. You'll see which category you qualify for and the points that you get. Okay, and that's based on your background and if you have provincial nomination. And so, during the draw, if your points are above the level that the government has announced, and it's in the category that the government has announced, then you will get an invitation to apply. If not, you stay in the pool. Okay, so it's not just good enough to be able to get into the pool. A lot of people say, oh, I applied for express entry, but they haven't really applied. They just created a profile. That's not called applying. You haven't applied for anything yet. You're just a candidate. You don't get to apply until you receive an invitation to apply. Okay. All right, so let's first talk about how to get into the pool. The first category is the federal skilled worker class. And this is a class where someone can apply even if they have never been to Canada before. The work experience required for this category is 1 year of high skilled work experience in one occupation where the person has worked 1,560 hours in a continuous manner. So there's no breaks in your employment, okay? And so 1,005 is equal to 30 hours a week. So basically you have worked 1 year, 30 hours, at least 30 hours a week, or let's say 2 years with 15 hours a week. You can do that as well, as long as there is no break, okay? Then you have to pass a language exam. We're looking at 6s in reading, writing, listening, and speaking. This is just to get into the pool. That probably won't, the 6s in IELTS and, it won't do much for you to actually get out of the pool with the points, but just to get into the pool. You have to have financial savings as well. If you're looking at one person, you're looking at just under 13,000 Canadian dollars. If you have other family members, then you're adding a few thousand for each family member. Okay, and then there's total of the minimum score for skilled worker class, and you can get into the pool. So we see right now a lot of people who can get into the pool from anywhere in the world, but the problem is two things. One, during COVID, the government hasn't been doing a lot of draws for people under this category, probably because right now people aren't able to land if they're outside of the country. So the government wants to concentrate on people they think will likely be inside the country, okay? And that's why they have concentrated on inviting people who have Canadian experience class. The second thing with federal skilled worker class is that the points for, overall is quite high. So, a lot of people have said to me, oh, you know what, Elizabeth, there's been a huge draw where everybody in the pool was out. So how come, if my points are at the 300 something level, you're saying I probably won't have a good chance? Well, it's because the draw was not for everybody in the pool. The draw, that huge draw that happened, was for people under the Canadian experience class. And so far, the draws that went down to, I think the last draw was 433, 32, okay? That was for someone in the Canadian experience class. So if you qualify under the federal skilled worker class and you had 460 something, you still would not have received an ITA. To qualify under the Canadian experience class, the work experience that you have to have is work experience in Canada when you are not a full-time student, okay? And it has to be legal, it has to be high skilled, and it has to be at least 1 year with an average of 30 hours a week or totaling 1,560 hours. So you could have different part-time work. It doesn't have to be continuous. It doesn't have to be in the same occupation. This is for the Canadian experience class. You have to be employed though, okay? You have to get a T4 from your employer to show that you're employed, right? You're deducted. You're not a contractor, okay? And you can't own significant shares in the company where you are being employed. That would be considered to be self-employed, okay? So the work experience for this is very, very specific. There is a language level that you have to pass, but in general, in order to just get into the pool, It's not, the language marks are not as important as language marks to get out of the pool. And I'll talk about that in a bit, okay? There is another category for people in the skilled trades, and these are for people who are in the mostly construction trades. So for the most part, people will have LMIA. You can also get a provincial certification for that in order to qualify for the skilled trades. Okay, so, let's say we have some people in the pool. The last draw was 432. So who's going to get out? Well, you say, well, Jing and Tripti. And I would say, well, you know what? Trick question, because the last draw was for Canadian experience class people only. So if Jing was qualified under Canadian experience class, Jing might be able to go out. But Trupti, if she qualified under the federal skilled worker class, she wouldn't be able to get out. Okay, so you're not just looking at numbers, you're looking at the categories now. Okay, so how do the numbers work? How do you get the points? The first thing is age, okay? Very, very important. And the thing is, when you get to your 30th birthday, your birthdays are no longer going to be happy birthdays, okay? Because every year in your 30s, you will go down by 5 or 6 points. In your 40s is a fast slide, -10, -11 points. By the time you get to your 45th birthday, the points don't go down anymore. But the bad news is that you get a big fat 0 for your age. So compare that to someone in their 20s who might have 110 points for age. That puts someone who's slightly older at a big disadvantage. Education is also quite important. If you don't have Canadian work experience that qualifies under the Canadian experience class, you would need at least 2 degrees for education. Language is also very important. In general, without Canadian experience, you will need to have language points of 7s in reading, writing, and speaking, and 8 in listening for IELTS, or 9s in every category for CELPIP. Relevant work experience. This is the Canadian work experience that I was talking about, and this will give you significant points. This is the same work experience that I described for people who qualify under the Canadian experience class. The only difference is for a Canadian experience class, you have to have that work experience within 3 years of applying, and this one you can count experience within 10 years of applying. Foreign work experience can also be important if it is high skilled and if it is over 1 year. And spouses, education, language, it depends on your spouse. You may get a few more points if they're super spouses. If not, you might get a few less points if you're married or have common law spouse who are accompanied. Provincial nominee programs. So what provincial nominee programs are is that the federal government, who is in charge of immigration, has made an agreement with every province to allow each province to have their own program, and that's called the provincial nominee program. And now every province, well, I don't know about every province, but most provinces will have something called that is express entry linked. They have their other programs and express entry linked programs. And if you are chosen and you receive a nomination for an express entry linked program, then you will get 600 points for this express entry. But it has to be express entry linked. It can't be just any provincial nominee program. We're going to talk about the Ontario program a little bit further, okay? Previous study in Canada, it can be important as well, 15 points or 30 points, depending on your program. Arranged employment. So often people think, well, I have a job offer I have arranged employment, right? Maybe not, okay? Arranged employment is only for people who have a LMIA or an employer-specific work permit. And if you have an employer-specific work permit that is not an LMIA, you have to work in the position for at least 1 year first. Also, you will have to have the job offer for around 1.5 to 2 years after you, at the time of application, okay? If you have siblings who are Canadians or permanent residents, you get a few points. Fluency in French. You know, I have a lot of people who say, well, Elizabeth, I'm just going to study French. I said, do you know any French? They're like, no, but I'm just going to study French to get these points. My advice to those who are thinking about that is, unless you have a very good talent in learning a language, you have to get your language points to a very, very high level of fluency in order to get points. And so if you can't, you know, if you're just going to study for a year and just get to the basic hello, goodbye, and basic conversation, it probably won't be worth it. But if you are fluent in French, then certainly go ahead and do the TEF, and that might be your key to getting your points for this. Okay. Trade certification. This is for people who are in the construction trades, if you have a trade certification. Okay. So if you look at this, some people might be very happy and say, oh, you know what? I think I have a great chance. Other people look at this and you might want to cry a little bit. Okay. Don't worry. All right. We're going to talk about some other kinds of ways that you can get permanent residence. Now, before I completely go away from express entry, I do want to talk about what I promised about the Ontario's provincial nominee program express entry linked, where you can get 600 points for express entry. How does that work? Okay. So Ontario's express entry linked streams is kind of like dating on Bumble. Okay. The dating site Bumble, as I understand it, people told me, I haven't tried it before, okay, is that the guys can't contact the women, right? The guys have to wait until the women see who's in the pool. They'll contact the men, and then the conversation can start. Similarly to this, you can't just apply directly to OINP. Okay, you're like the guy, you can't apply directly to OINP and contact them. You have to first be in the express entry pool, and then the Ontario government can say, oh, you know what? You're interesting. We are going to give you an expression of interest, and you can apply with us. Then you can apply with them, and if you receive the nomination, you'll get 600 points. So who is Ontario going to be interested in? The first one is the human capital stream. And this is something that it's not for sure who they're interested in. They have announced the tech draws. So they have said, we're very interested in people who have tech backgrounds in certain occupations. But just because you have work experience in certain occupations does not mean that they will send you an expression of interest. They also have a draw where they announce a minimum score. And sometimes, you know, I think it's been in the mid 450s, for example. Okay, so if, you know, it's there and you have experience in one of the occupations, then they might give you an expression of interest. Okay, others, so they've also, you know, had other occupations identified. They don't announce them beforehand, but they'll just see that you're in there and they might offer. Sometimes before they've had, you know, people with job offers, they've basically issued that expression of interest. Okay, to qualify, you have to have a bachelor's degree anywhere in the world, but you have to have a bachelor's degree. The second one is the skilled trades. This is something that's very interesting as well. So this is for people who are in one of the specified trades, mostly construction, and you have 1 year of work experience in Ontario in the last 2 years, and you're in the pool. then they could issue a expression of interest for you as well. People who speak French, are fluent in French, okay? Do your TEF, you're in the pool, you may very well receive an expression of interest as well. You have to have a bachelor's degree or higher as well. So these are the different streams that are express entry linked. Now, what I want to talk about is now getting away from express entry, non-express entry programs. And essentially, the first one that I want to talk about is the employer-based one. So for the employer-based one, your employer first has to qualify. If your employer is inside GTA, the gross income is, they have to have a gross income of $1 million, have at least 5 full-time Canadian or permanent resident employees, and be in business for 3 years. If your employer is outside of the GTA, and you lucky people in Hamilton, you guys are found to be outside of the GTA, then the employer just has to have a gross income of over 500,000, have 3 full-time permanent resident or Canadian employees, and be in business for 3 years. The job offer always has to be full-time, at least 30 hours a week, and permanent. Okay, so let's say you have such a job offer. Then what happens? If you have that, then you can look at whether or not you qualify. The first one, the international student class, you must apply within 2 years of graduation of either a 2-year program or more, or if it's a 1-year program, it has to be a postgraduate program. And the officers right now have been becoming really, really big sticklers on what this program entails. So they say for postgrad programs, you can only have a degree. Everybody has to have a degree as a prerequisite. It can't be that the prerequisite is a degree and work experience or degree and diploma. It has to be just a degree, okay? And it's from a public university or college in Ontario, one of the listed ones. So if you qualify under that, and if you have that, then you can apply. You don't have to have any work experiences at all, as long as the job is high skilled and the salary meets entry level wage. The skilled worker one is something where it's similar to the above, no degree or anything, but they have to have 2 years of work experience in the last 5 years in the occupation. And the last one is one of the only lower skilled work that you can do. The work is not just any lower skilled. It has to be on a list. It's called the in-demand occupation list. You have to have 9 months of work experience in Ontario in this occupation, okay? Now, one more layer on top of that is there is going to be a new EOI system. And so basically right now, last year, there were too many people applying under these categories, and these categories would be open and shut in a matter of a few minutes. So what the government is doing now to try to make it more fair is they're going to impose something similar to express entry criteria, but hopefully not everything. We are going to go and be meeting with the OINP later this week. And once we do know some more about this information, we will be sending out something on our newsletter. So everybody who's registered today, we're going to put you on our newsletter so that we can continue to tell you some news like this after this. And if you wanted to sign up for a newsletter, then you can go on our website, or I will send you the slides as well if you've registered, and you can sign up there. Okay. So this new EOI system, you have to first go into the pool if you qualify, and then they'll have a draw where they will invite the people who have the top scores to then apply. Master's and PhD streams. These are for people who've graduated from a master's and PhD in Ontario. Okay, you have to apply within 2 years of graduation and no job offer required. Minimum savings for masters. If you're masters, you have to submit your English results. Now, for PhD, it's not a requirement now to submit it to qualify, but for masters and also a PhD, I should have said PhD in there, the new EOI system is coming into place and language will likely be a part of that. So even if you have a PhD, I would suggest that you go and do your English exam or French exam as well, if you can speak French. And then that will be important in order to get through for the EOI system. All right, now let's move away from being employed and such. And I wanted to talk about a new one called, well, it's not a new one, but it's a exciting program for entrepreneurs called the Startup Visa Program. The Startup Visa Program is for up to 5 founders. If you're going to start a new and innovative company in Canada and you own majority shares of the company together and each own at least 10% of the company, and each person has an active management role, and you can pass the IELTS of 5, okay, then you can all apply together. You can up to 5, so it could be yourself or up to 4 other partners as well. And very importantly, your company has to receive the letter of support from a designated organization like an incubator, angel investor group, or venture capital group. And so, if you have an excellent company or let me know and we can see whether or not this is something that's for you. This is outside of Express Entry. As long as you can get the letter of support, you can show the above, then you can certainly look at this as an option for yourself. Caregiver program, some people have wondered about this. So this one, if you have 2 years of work experience in Canada, taking care of someone in their home for children, elderly, or disabled people. So this is not something where you are hired by an agency. This is somewhere where you're taking care of someone in their home, okay? And you have at least a 1-year post-secondary education credential from anywhere. Then you could, you have to meet the English level of 5, okay? Then you could apply for permanent residence. So let's say you're a student or a worker and your spouse has an open work permit. They could go and do this, work for 2 years, and apply for permanent residence for the entire family, okay? If you're interested in any of these programs, do let me know and I can speak to you further about this. Entrepreneurs, some of these options. Startup visa, we've already talked about. Work permits, and this is an Express Entry link. So if you are an executive manager of your company, we can apply for an employer-specific work permit for you under intercompany or the entrepreneur work permit. And if you work there for a year and you have, at least 1.5 or 2 years for your job offer, well, you're going to offer yourself a job, so that shouldn't be a problem. You will get 200 more points for Express Entry, and so that's something that we can do as well for entrepreneurs. There is an OINP entrepreneur category. This is a provincial one. It's not very popular because of the amount of risk that is involved. You have to show that you're going to build a successful company in order, and the length of time that it takes. But it is something that may be good for certain people in certain circumstances. There's another one for if you're an artist or an athlete and you've been self-employed or participating in a world-class basis for at least 2 years in the last 5 years, and you can show that you can support yourself in Canada in your art or in your sport, then we can also apply for permanent residence for you. Okay. All right. So I've talked a lot, and I just wanted to give you a brief summary of what I would suggest that you do. Okay. And what are the next steps? The first step is to have your individual plan. Don't look at what other people do. Don't look at what is the most popular plan for others. Who cares? It doesn't matter. Your plan is specific to your goals. Okay. And if you wanted to speak with us to have a plan, let us know, and we can have a consultation to go over your plans. Okay. Once you have that plan, then do what you need to do. It sounds simple, but it's not that simple, because the plan may require you to do difficult things. It may require you to do another study program. It may require you to really study hard for your IELTS and get those results. So be prepared to work. Okay. Make sure you stay in status and don't misrepresent. Why is it the first thing that I told you guys is how to stay in status? Because if you are not in status, you basically cut yourself off at the knees. Okay, you don't give yourself a chance. So make sure that you're staying in status and don't misrepresent. If you misrepresent anything, it may sound so easy. Your friend might say, hey, I got a fake job, right? I was able to get anything that is fake. You'll spend your entire life wondering, or somebody can blackmail you, and you'll spend your entire life just looking over your shoulder, because you can always, even if you pass, even if you get your citizenship in the end, that can be stripped away from you if you do misrepresent. Now, all of you, if you're coming to the session, you're workers or students, you should have a bright path towards permanent residence, as long as you have a plan and you do it properly. Okay. If your application is rejected, contact a lawyer right away. If its rejection is inside Canada, you only have 15 days to file the notice. And if you call the call center says, oh, just write a letter to immigration. You know what? The call center is not like Amazon. Okay. They are not there for you. They are there to represent the immigration's interests, and they can provide all sorts of advice that is not to your benefit. If you go and write a letter to immigration, that is your one chance to ask for reconsideration. If you don't know what to write and they reject it, even if you come to me afterwards, I can't go and do a reconsideration anymore, because immigration only looks at one reconsideration. So make sure you go and do this properly. And you may be out of time as well. Restoration of status timelines are there. Your status timelines are out there. So hopefully you don't wait until your application is rejected to contact a lawyer. Hopefully you do it right in the beginning. But if it is rejected, do contact the lawyer right away. So I have put up our information. And if you want to sign up for a newsletter, you can sign up for a newsletter. And also I've put the Global Hamilton Connect information up here as well, because if you have any questions, they are a fantastic resource to help you guys out in Hamilton. Okay. All right, Zia, we have some questions.
We've got lots of great questions, Elizabeth. So to start off, can you go over the application for the postgrad work permit? When can someone work and when do they have to stop working?
Okay, so let's say you have you're in your final exams. So if your final exams are not finished yet, you are still a student, you can work part-time. And when your grades come out, it doesn't matter if you don't check your grades, okay? When your grades come out, and it says that you completed your program, that is when you've completed your program. At that point, you stop being a student and you have to stop working. Full-time, part-time, anytime, you have to stop working. When you then you can then apply for your post-grad work permit. What's the deadline? 90 days or when your study permit expires, whichever comes first. If you apply within that time period, you can start working full-time until your work permit is issued, and hopefully your work permit will be issued, and then you can continue on and continue to work.
Great. What are the people right now? Everyone's working from home, or a lot of people are working from home. Does that change the, I guess, how much you can work? So if you're a full-time student, can you work beyond the 20 hours a week if you're working remotely and from home?
So working in Canada, whether it's remotely or not, as long as it's counted as work, as long as you're competing with the labor market in Canada, then you have to have the authorization to work. So whether you're working from home, it doesn't necessarily matter. However, if you're not competing with the labor market, let's say you are working for a company overseas and that company has nothing to do with Canada, except for you're working as their employee overseas. That is not counted as work. So you can work and do that even if you don't have authorization to work in Canada.
Okay. And then what about, so that same rule would then apply for when I'm done my program?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Talking about permanent residence, you went through a couple different options. You talked about OINP streams, you talked about the federal skilled worker and the Canadian experience class. Can we be applying for multiple streams at the same time?
You can. You only get one permanent residence, but you certainly can. You may not want to just throw paint on the wall and see what sticks, right? You want to have a specific plan, but sometimes a person could qualify for both categories, and you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. Yeah, you can certainly. For example, some people apply for the provincial nominee programs, and then afterwards that takes a long time, but they're worried that maybe later they don't have enough points for express entry. But let's say they get an ITA for express entry. Yeah, you could do express entry as well.
Okay, and what about applying for the postgrad work permit and, for example, the PhD OINP stream? Can that happen at the same time?
You can, absolutely. PhD OINP stream is very different from temporary. So whatever permanent residence you apply for, that doesn't give you implied status. You can only get implied status if you apply for temporary status before your current status expires. So the PhD stream, you can apply for that. You can apply for the postgrad. The PhD stream and the master's stream, they will not like someone who is continuing to study. So if you're doing your master's and then you're doing your PhD and you want to apply for the master's stream, likely your application would be rejected because they're looking for people who are graduating and ready to go into the workforce in Ontario.
Okay. Elizabeth, can you go over the difference between high and low skilled? Like, what does that mean?
So if you Google NOC, National Occupation Classification Codes, all of the occupations are grouped into 5 different categories, and O, A, and B are high skilled, and C and D are low skilled. So it depends on not just what you're called, but your duties. What do you actually do? And check it out.
And how does that impact, like if I'm working in a high, like why should I pick a high skilled versus a low skilled position?
If you want to immigrate to Canada, you'll want to take a look at, the permanent residence streams that I've talked about. Most of them require high skilled work. That's why it's important.
Perfect. So someone who's working, for example, as a TA or a graduate assistant or research assistant, during their master's or PhD, can that work experience count towards Canadian experience class or points in express entry?
not towards Canadian Experience class. It won't give you any points for express entry. What it will do is allow you to enter the pool. If that's the only work experience that you have, you can qualify to enter the pool through the federal skilled worker class, but it won't give you points for work experience in Canada.
Okay, great. And then you mentioned something about a postgrad work permit that's expiring soon, that there's the ability to actually extend it. Can you talk about that again?
Yes, so if your work permit expired, what is it? Is it January 27th of last year? And
yeah.
January 27th of last year. And it's going to, you have until July 27th of this year. So if your work permit expires between January 27th of last year and 4 months from July is November 27th of this year, then you can apply to extend your work permit for 18 months, and you have to apply before July 27th.
Perfect. And then spouses, if I'm a postgrad work permit holder, can my spouse get an open spousal work permit? And when do I, like, what point can I apply for them to get that?
So if you have a postgrad work permit, you have to have a high skilled job in order for your spouse to get an open work permit. If you have a high skilled job, you can apply for an open work permit for your spouse. Now, your spouse's work permit is valid until it's expired. It does not necessarily link, unless it says on her work permit, it's not linked to when you stop studying, okay? So, but in order to extend that work permit, the officer will want to see that you have a high skilled job, and they'll usually want to see that you're working there as well.
Okay, and then last question, with regards to COVID right now and processing times, are we seeing delays for applications because of COVID?
Yes. For permanent residents, we're seeing a lot of delays. Temporary residents, they've gone back. It depends on where it is. And I've seen some study permits and work permits being issued quite fast. On the other hand, we've seen some work permits and study permits from overseas, especially overseas, being very, very slow. So, it does depend on where it is, but yeah, COVID has really mixed it all up as to what the processing times are.
Okay. And then one last question here. Again, with regards to applying for permanent residence, how do we know what the best route is to apply for permanent residence?
That's just like, going to a restaurant and saying, all right, tell me, how much is dinner? What should, everybody's situation is different. You have to have, what I've told you is just general information to give you a sense of what is out there. Okay. There's a lot that I haven't talked about. I could talk for days as to, what is out there. Okay. What we would recommend is that you come for a consultation. If you tell us that you have attended this webinar, we'll give you the discount. So do tell us that you've come to this, and then we will give you a special plan for yourself as to what you need to do to get your permanent residence.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Elizabeth.
Okay, thanks so much, Zia.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It's been a pleasure always. A lot of information to take back from this session as always. I hope everyone who was here today enjoyed the information that I did, and that they take back all these key information that you've shared with them and then plan their future properly. And you were right. It's not like going to a restaurant. You have to plan properly. It's your future, right? So they have to be very careful when they decide, and calling you for consultation will give them the right guidance if they need guidance to find the right process that fits their need. So really appreciate everything you've done today and you've shared with us today. Thanks, Zia, for manning the Q&A platform and getting everyone questions out there. It was really good. Thanks again, guys.
Oh, thanks for having us, guys. Take care and stay safe.
Thanks, you too.